When you think about global trade, the rules that kind of hold it all together,
Mm.
they feel like they're really under pressure right now. Not just reviewed, but maybe on a bit of a knife edge.
Absolutely. It feels like a critical moment. You see these major negotiations just stalled, and, well, the basic ways we've managed global commerce for decades are being questioned.
It's definitely a pivotal time. So today, we're going to take a deep dive into what's next for the World Trade Organization, the WTO. We're drawing on a backgrounder from the Council on Foreign Relations.
Right.
And our goal here really is to pull out the key insights, help you understand the huge challenges this institution is facing, how we got here, and maybe what paths forward look like,
Right.
if there are any clear paths.
And what's so fascinating, I think, is that this is an institution, the WTO, that for, 25 years was the main body for global trade rules.
The go-to, yeah.
Exactly. And now it's facing this immense pressure. And it's not just about tariffs anymore. It's about the core machinery, the things designed to keep trade fair and crucially predictable. Can that machinery still work?
Okay, so most people probably have a basic idea of the WTO, the global trade referee, sort of.
Mm-hmm.
But what's really key now, I think, isn't just what it is, but how its main jobs, its core functions, have been challenged. The sources say it's, a forum for talks, an arbiter for disputes, a monitor. What made it so vital for so long?
Well, context is important here. The WTO, set up in Geneva in 1995, it actually followed the earlier agreement, GATT. That one goes way back to 1948.
Very GATT.
Yeah. And the WTO's growth tells a story. Started with about 123 members, now it's 164. That huge multilateral reach, covering almost the entire global economy under one set of rules, that was its strength.
And the backgrounder highlights these core principles.
Right.
Openness, non-discrimination. That last one means you treat all your trading partners the same, basically.
Essentially, yes. The most favored nation principle.
And it aimed to lower barriers, boost transparency, stability.
Yeah.
Oh, and help developing countries adjust.
Yeah.
But how are those big ideals square with, national interest? That always seems to be the sticking point.
That is the challenge, isn't it? These principles sound straightforward, like non-discrimination, but they get incredibly complex fast, especially when you have different economies, different priorities, developing versus developed. It's an ideal, absolutely, but also a constant source of friction in negotiations. Officially, decisions happen by consensus at these big ministerial conferences. They've had 11 since '96, another planned for June 2022.
But getting that consensus?
Exactly, getting everyone to agree. That's become, well, almost the WTO's biggest hurdle, as we'll see.
Okay, so if getting consensus for new rules was tough, the thing that seems really striking from its history was the dispute settlement system. That seems like it was a huge deal.
Oh, absolutely.
For decades, it was the place to go. Like a world trade court almost, stopping potential trade wars before they started. How did that system work? And crucially, how did it end up, paralyzed?
It really was the WTO's crown jewel for over 20 years. It had this three-step process. First, countries were supposed to talk, try to sort it out themselves, consultation.
Okay.
If that didn't work, a panel, like a sort of court from the dispute settlement body, would hear the case, make a ruling, but then, and this was key, either side could appeal.
Ah, the appeal stage.
Yes, to the appellate body, a group of 7 judges. And their decisions were binding. If a country still wouldn't comply, the winner could retaliate. Think blocking imports, raising tariffs. It had real teeth.
Binding decisions. That sounds powerful. And the U.S. was a big user of this system, wasn't it?
Oh, massively. The most active, actually. Looking at the numbers, the U.S. filed 124 complaints itself, and it was on the receiving end, the defendant, in 156 cases.
So involved on both sides.
Deeply involved. The Obama administration, for instance, used it effectively. They won, I think, 7 cases against China on things like subsidies for agriculture, aircraft, steel imports. So it wasn't theoretical. It was actively shaping trade flows.
Okay, so it worked. It was used heavily. Where did things go wrong? The material points to the Trump administration's combative approach.
Yeah.
How did that specifically break the appellate body?
Right. This is the crux of it. The Trump administration systematically blocked the appointment of new judges to that appellate body.
Just refused to approve them.
Exactly. They argued the body was overreaching, making new rules instead of interpreting existing ones, taking too long. So as judges' terms expired, they weren't replaced.
And you need a certain number to hear a case.
Precisely. You need a minimum of 3 judges to review an appeal. By December 2019, enough terms had expired that they fell below that minimum. So the U.S., by blocking appointments, effectively shut it down. It couldn't hear any new appeals. Paralyzed.
Wow. So what happens then when the main enforcement mechanism, the thing with the binding decisions, just stops working?
Yeah.
What does that do to global trade?
The implications are just huge, massive uncertainty. Without that final appeal stage, the rulings from the initial panels can just be appealed into the void, essentially. There's no finality.
So no real enforcement.
Very little. It severely weakens the WTO's ability to enforce its own rules. Now, some countries like the EU and I think over 24 others, they've tried to set up a temporary fix, an interim arbitration system just among themselves.
Like a workaround.
Kind of, but it's patchwork. It's not the universal system the WTO offered. It leaves global trade governance in a really precarious spot, less predictable, certainly.
Okay, so the dispute system is carolized. What about making new rules, the other big function? That seems to have hit a wall too, especially with the Doha round.
Yes, the Doha Development Agenda, that's the big one, launched way back in 2001.
With really ambitious goals, right? Helping developing countries integrate more by liberalizing trade in agriculture, services, manufactured goods.
Huge goals, but that's where it ran into trouble. Those ambitions clashed with deep disagreements. Developed countries' agricultural subsidies were a massive sticking point.
Always agriculture.
It often is. Then you had fights over intellectual property rights and technical stuff like the special safeguard mechanism idea for developing countries, letting them raise tariffs temporarily if imports surged. They just couldn't bridge the gaps.
So it just stalled out completely.
Pretty much. The fundamental disagreements, particularly between major developed and developing economies, were too wide. The consensus model just couldn't cope with that level of divergence on core issues. Doha effectively stalled.
Were there any successes during that period, though, or was it all just gridlock on the negotiation front?
No, not total gridlock. There were some bright spots. The 2013 Trade Facilitation Agreement, the TFA, that was actually a pretty big deal.
What did that do?
It was about streamlining customs, cutting red tape at the border, making things faster, cheaper. Estimates suggested it could boost global trade by like $1 trillion. That's significant.
Okay, that's something.
And then in 2015, at the Nairobi Ministerial, they made progress on eliminating tariffs on certain IT products, expanding an existing agreement. So smaller, more focused deals were possible, just not the grand Doha bargain.
So pieces worked, but the main event, Doha, was seen as, well, not a success.
That's fair to say. Even the Director General at the time, Roberto Azevedo, basically admitted the big Doha round ambitions hadn't panned out. He talked about the WTO being back in business with those smaller deals, but the failure of the main round was a major blow to its legislative function.
And the criticisms didn't just come from governments struggling to agree, right? The
Yeah.
sources mentioned a whole range of critics, farmers, labor groups, environmentalists. It seems the WTO became a target from many angles.
Oh, absolutely. It wasn't just about stalled talks or China, although that was a big part of it later. There were fundamental criticisms about the impact of the rules themselves.
Like what specifically?
Well, take intellectual property, the TRIPS agreement. Critics, especially activists focused on developing countries, argued it kept essential medicines too expensive by enforcing strong patent rules.
The access to medicines issue.
Exactly. We saw that debate flare up again intensely with COVID-19 vaccines, the push for a waiver. But, the counter-argument is that strong IP protection drives innovation, which ultimately helps everyone. So, a real tension there.
What about other areas? Sovereignty comes up, environmental rules.
Right. There is this persistent concern that WTO rules can force countries to change their domestic laws or regulations in ways they don't want to, undermining national sovereignty.
You give an example.
Sure. Disputes over things like genetically modified foods, where some countries wanted bans, or specific labels that others argued were unfair trade barriers, or even labeling tuna as dolphin safe. Environmental groups often worry about a race to the bottom countries lowering environmental standards to compete on cost.
And labor standards, too.
Yes, similar concerns from labor groups, that the WTO doesn't do enough to protect workers' rights, allowing competition from places with lower wages or weaker protections, which they argue undercuts wages in higher-cost countries. China's labor practices often came up in that context.
And that connects to probably the most politically charged criticism, especially in the U.S. Job losses due to imports, particularly after China joined the WTO in 2001. You hear some big numbers cited.
It's definitely one of the most debated impacts. You have organizations like the Economic Policy Institute pointing to studies claiming, over 3 million U.S. jobs lost due to competition with China post-WTO accession. That's a powerful narrative.
But is it the whole story?
Well, that's the debate, isn't it? Many economists push back. People like Douglas Irwin argue that, yes, trade causes disruption, but technology and automation have been much bigger drivers of manufacturing job changes overall.
So blaming trade is too simplistic.
They'd argue it is, and they'd also point out the benefits. Trade with China lowered prices for consumers on lots of goods, increased U.S. company productivity. It's complex. There are definitely winners and losers from trade shifts, but attributing all job loss purely to trade, or specifically China's WTO entry, is something many economists challenge. We have to present both sides of that.
Okay, so the multilateral system, the WTO, is facing paralysis in disputes, stalled big negotiations, lots of criticism. What are countries doing instead? The material points towards plurilateral and bilateral deals.
That's exactly the trend we're seeing. If you can't get all 164 members to agree, maybe you can get a smaller group to agree on specific things. That's plurilateralism.
So like clubs within the WTO.
Kind of. Subsets of members agreeing to rules just among themselves, often on specific sectors. We already mentioned the Information Technology Agreement from 2015 that wasn't all members, but covered like 97% of IT trade. Huge impact.
Right.
Then there were talks on a Trade and Services Agreement, TISA, involving about 23 members. There's an existing government procurement agreement, GPA, again, not all members, and talks on an Environmental Goods Agreement, EGA. It's a more flexible, maybe more pragmatic approach when full consensus is out of reach.
And besides those plurilateral deals, there's also the old-fashioned country-to-country or region-to-region deals.
Yes.
Bilateral and regional FTAs.
Yes, absolutely. A big surge in those two. Things like the TPP, the Trans-Pacific Partnership, even though the U.S. pulled out under President Trump.
Who was pretty skeptical of these big multilateral things generally.
Very skeptical. He preferred bilateral deals. But it's interesting, even after the U.S. left TPP, the remaining countries went ahead with a revised version, and you see the EU pursuing its own FTAs. So countries are definitely exploring these alternatives when the WTO route seems blocked or too slow.
Which brings up a big question, I guess. Are these alternatives, these plurilateral and bilateral deals, just a necessary adaptation, or do they maybe make things even messier, a spaghetti bowl of different rules?
That's the debate. On one hand, they allow progress where the WTO is stuck. More tailored agreements, maybe faster. On the other hand, yeah, you risk creating a much more fragmented global trading system. Different rules for different partners, overlapping agreements. It can be complex, especially for smaller countries or businesses trying to navigate it all. Does it undermine the non-discrimination principle the WTO is built on? It's a real tension.
So wrapping this up, it's clearly a really complex, evolving situation. The stakes feel incredibly high for, well, everyone involved in the global economy. We've touched on the big challenges for the WTO, that paralyzed dispute system, the stalled Doha talks, all those criticisms from different groups. And now this rise of alternative plurilateral and bilateral agreements. The whole structure seems to be shifting.
It really does. And it leaves us with a pretty profound question, I think. Given this shift, given the gridlock at the WTO, especially on enforcement, can these big multilateral institutions, like the WTO is designed to be, actually govern global trade effectively in the 21st century?
Or are we moving somewhere else?
Or are we maybe settling into a different era, one with more fragmented rules, maybe less universal agreements? And if so, what does that actually mean for your economic future, for the cost of things, for global economic stability? Something to chew on.
Definitely something to mull over as you try to make sense of the global economy. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.